And all the woe that moved him so that he gave that bitter cry, with wild regrets and the bloody sweats none knew so well as I, for he who lives more lives than one, more deaths than one must die. On that note, hello everybody, welcome to and welcome back to my channel Book Time with Elvis with me, Mark, and I hope so much you're doing very well. That is an excerpt from The Ballad of Reading Gaol by Oscar Wilde, and it probably is the first bit of Victorian poetry that I memorized. I can't remember the reason, to be honest with you. I never studied it. I have a vague recollection that back in the early 90s there was like a version of Wikipedia called Encarta, and I seem to think that while I was doing The Importance of Being Earnest at school, that it had that clip on it, and that's probably why I remembered it. But you're probably thinking, why am I talking about this? Well, you would have seen, I guess, by the thumbnail, but of course I'm doing a tag today, and it's all about Victorian literature. It is Roz from Scallydangling About the Books tag, the Victorian Literature Journey tag, an adaptation of the Shakespeare Journey tag that was out back in September. And this is a wonderful tag, just like the Shakespeare one. This is to celebrate Victober, which of course is running all month, hosted by the wonderful ladies Katie, Books and Things, Kate Howe Reads, Books with Petra and Blatantly Bookish, and of course Roz, who made the tag at Scallydangling About the Books. And she was kind enough to tag me, so I thought I would do it and show off a little bit at the beginning. So what are the prompts? Let's jump in here. Number one, what was your first experience reading Victorian literature and how was it? Honestly, I can't really tell you how it was, because I think I was to some degree born into it. I grew up as a child, if not necessarily reading them, but having them read to me. So things like Sherlock Holmes, Treasure Island in particular, were with me from my earliest memories. So I don't really remember even the first time that I might have read Victorian literature on my own. It was just something that was a constant in my life, really. I always had a fascination with Victorians and the Victorian era. My grandmother had, hundreds of photographs of Victorian and Edwardian relatives, and I used to sit down with her for hours, going through them and discussing them. And it was always just fascinating to me, really, that these people were so close in terms of years, really, by the fact that, I was born in 1980 and there were still Victorians alive. I suppose they would have been maybe what we call Edwardians more, because their adult years would have been in the Edwardian era, but they were still born under the reign of Queen Victoria, so that counts for my money. So it's hard to say exactly what my first experience with it is, but that's the best answer I can give you. Has the reading of a Victorian book ever brought you to tears? If so, tell us more. Yes, again, on numerous times, both tears of sadness and tears of joy and tears of laughter. I wondered if I could do this tag without referencing my favorite book of all time, which, if you watch this channel, it's 3 Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome. And that is actually, I think, quite an underrated book, really, in terms of, I'm doing my best to get more and more people to read it. I noticed Michael K. Vaughan said he'll give it a go soon, probably. So that would be good. But that's a good example of something that has really laugh out loud moments that, you can laugh so much that you can cry, really. But it also has one or two very, very poignant and tear-jerky moments in it as well. Which, okay, I won't talk about because I don't want to spoil anything. I mean, overall, it is a very, very funny book, and it is mostly a funny book. But there's a couple of serious things within that. So, yeah, I'm trying to think of a specific example. I'm quite often moved by by Victorian poetry, I suppose. I it probably ranks among my favorite era for poetry. In my, I wanted to do it because there's a prompt later where you have to, read a scene or something from your from a favorite scene from a Victorian work. And I thought about doing poetry. I thought about if, I mean, I know it was written in 1895, but I think it wasn't published until after the Victorian era, around 1909, 1910, something like that. I couldn't remember Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade. I thought I could. Certainly don't know all of the Ballad of Reading Gaol. Vita Lampada is a great one. The whole play up and play the game. Again, though, I couldn't remember it. The only one I could remember is Invictus by William Ernest Henley. So I could read that, perhaps. I don't know. Or at least recite that. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloodied, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade. And yet the measure of the years finds and shall find me, unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. There we go. I don't know why I read that really, other than it is something that I find extremely moving, especially when you know about the life of the author as well. And it is, for me, a very, very emotional piece. And I think it can bring a tear to my eye. It hasn't just now, but I suppose if I was reading it privately, it would do. So there we go. Number 3. Are there any people who have played a significant role in your Victorian literature journey? Yes, I would say again, it has to be grandparents, parents even, teachers, family friends, all played a significant role in my growing up with Victorian literature. As I already mentioned, my maternal grandmother instilled an interest in the Victorians in me because I used to just love hearing her talk about her childhood, and of course her parents were Victorians, and she would always tell me about the books and things she read as a child, which of course would have been either published in the Victorian era or at least the Edwardian era as well. My paternal grandparents, they had a lot of old books, again, Victorian, Edwardian books. And when I used to visit them, I was always allowed to take a book, which was great. And I have although it's in terrible condition, I do have a really battered and recovered, even the recover has been battered and gnawed by one of the family dogs at one time, of first edition of Three Men in a Boat. And the wonderful thing is it's like my great grandfather, is that right? Or my great grandfather? No, my great grandfather. So it's my great grandmother's father. Wrote his name in it, and that's always really nice to me that I have that written in the book, because it's been in the family since then. So it must have been bought new, I guess. And he wrote his name in it, and then it went to my great grandmother, and then on through to my grandfather, and then one day while visiting them, I was able to take it with me. The condition, as I said, isn't particularly good. Inside, it's fine; it's perfectly readable. It's the cover that's been battered about a bit, but But to me, of course, it's priceless, I suppose, because of that. I had friends of my mother who were the same age as my grandparents, and they were almost like a third set of grandparents to me. And the man especially instilled this love I have of Treasure Island in me by Robert Louis Stevenson. He used to read it to me. We used to watch the old 1950, was it 1950, 1951 film, the Disney film with Robert Newton together. He would draw treasure maps. We would go treasure hunting in the garden, and all the time, we'd play games around it and make wooden swords, and he was absolutely fantastic about it all. And that holds definitely special memories for me. My father was and is a big fan of Sherlock Holmes, and every time he would, because he traveled a lot when I was a child, and every time he went on business, he would record a Sherlock Holmes story on a cassette tape. And I would always wake up, because he'd probably have to leave either very late at night or very early in the morning to catch a flight. But I would wake up, and then I'd take the tape and put it in my Fisher-Price tape recorder and play it back. And there would always be a Sherlock Holmes story in there, whether one by Doyle or one my father made up. That was, of course, very happy memory. He'd also do the same for my sister, although I don't remember what stories he would do for her. But of course, that was great. And there was always like a message as well at the end, be a good boy for your mum and that kind of stuff, which is, very, very sweet. And then at school as well, I suppose. Although I don't really remember having a huge number of set texts when it came to school, Victorian literature at school. The only one I remember was at GCSE, which is like the standard testing we do at 16 in England. One of the texts I had to do was Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. But apart from that, I don't remember. Yes, poetry, and the importance of being earnest. But then I want to say that I might have actually read that on my own, rather than us having to do it at school. So bizarrely, I had a lot of experience with the likes of Chaucer and Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe and all sorts, and some modern 20th century stuff. But I don't have a huge recollection of ever really studying Victorian literature at school. However, I can be sure that my teachers would have been very supportive. They were wonderful, really wonderful, especially my teachers at A-level. Fantastic guys they were. Number 4, do you have a favourite film or TV adaptation of a Victorian book? What about one you'd like to see made? Well, yes, of course, it has to be, for me, it has to be Treasure Island. And the 1951 version with Robert Newton. I think that's just a fantastic film. Absolutely. And I'd still watch it. I'd still watch it even now. Although it's funny, isn't it? Because it is Victorian, but it's set in Georgian times. So Victorian historical fiction, let's say. And one that I would like to see made, I don't know. Actually. I'm not sure. I just think they'd mess it up. Anything they'd try to make now, they'd probably mess it up. So perhaps not. I mean, another film I absolutely love. I can't for the life of me remember the year, but it's must be Great Expectations with John Mills, and of course Oliver Twist with Alec Guinness as Fagin. They were both fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed both of those as a kid. So those are probably my 3 favourites. And as I say, with regards to something I'd like to see made, nothing now. As I said, they'll probably spoil it. So there we go. Number 5, which character in Victorian literature most resembles you or you identify with most? Again, it's difficult. I love Long John Silver. I think there's elements, that's the thing, there's elements of a lot of characters, there's even elements probably of Mrs. Havisham within me, Lady Bracknell. I know Roz mentioned it, but I desperately wanted to do my own Edith Evans impression as well. Handbag! I think, there's something, because I think quite often they can be quite caricaturish, a lot of the way characters are presented in certain, Victorian works. And I think in that respect, then, there is, you can take different elements from across the board that you can identify with. And there's certainly, you can see the humanity in many of the characters as well, I think, which again helps you identify with them. So it's very difficult to say that I identify with one particular character only. I think it would be a mashup really of all different ones. I mean, perhaps I should leave it to you to tell me which character I most resemble, although I might regret it because I'll probably get things like the Beadle from Oliver Twist, or was it Mr. Fezziwig from from Christmas Carol. Speaking of Christmas Carol, I mean, at the moment with the house building and everything, I do feel a strong sympathy for Ebenezer Scrooge, actually. So yeah, could be that. Do you have a favourite moment, scene, or line from Victorian literature? Tell us about it or read it to us. Well, I mean, one of my favourites, without doubt, is of course from Three Men in a Boat, and it's the passing on the river of Hampton Court, and then the retelling of what happened the last time Harris was there. I think it was Harris, wasn't it? It wasn't George was there. And that, of course, is hysterical. But I won't read that one because I think people might be sick of my thumping on all the time about Three Men in a Boat. However, I will take the liberty of reading part of my favourite scene from Treasure Island. And what you have to realise is that there's been a mutiny, if you haven't read it, and the ones loyal to the captain and the squire and people like that, there's a small group of them holed up in this stockade on the island, and they're basically surrounded by a load of cutthroat pirates led by the wonderful Long John Silver, and he's come to parley with them and discuss terms. Now, resumed Silver, here it is. You give us the chart to get the treasure by and drop shooting poor seamen and stoving of their heads in while asleep. You do that and we'll offer you a choice. Either you come aboard along of us, once the treasure shipped, and then I'll give you my affidavy upon my word of honour to clap you somewhere safe ashore. Or if that ain't to your fancy, some of my hands being rough and having old scores on account of hazing, then you can stay here, you can. We'll divide stores with you man for man, and I'll give my affidavy as before to speak the first ship I sight and send them back here to pick you up. Now you'll own that's talking, handsomer you couldn't look to get, now you. And I hope, raising his voice, that all hands in this here blockhouse will overhaul my words, for what is spoke to one is spoke to all. Captain Smollett rose from his seat and knocked out the ashes of his pipe in the palm of his left hand. Is that all? He asked. Every last word, by thunder, answered John. Refuse that, and you've seen the last of me but musket balls. Very good, said the captain. Now you'll hear me. If you'll come up one by one, unarmed, I'll engage to clap you all in irons and take you home to a fair trial in England. If you won't, my name is Alexander Smollett. I've flown my sovereign's colours, and I'll see you all to Davy Jones. You can't find the treasure, you can't sail the ship. There's not a man among you fit to sail the ship. You can't fight us. Grey there got away from 5 of you. Your ship's in irons, Master Silver. You're on a lee shore, and so you'll find. I stand here and tell you so, and they're the last good words you'll get from me. For in the name of heaven, I'll put a bullet in your back when next I meet you. Tramp, my lad, bundle out of this. Please, hand over hand and double quick. Silver's face was a picture. His eyes started in his head with wrath. He shook the fire out of his pipe. Give me a hand up, he cried. Not I, returned the captain. Who'll give me a hand up, he roared. Not a man among us moved. Growling the foulest imprecations, he crawled along the sand till he got hold of the porch and could hoist himself again upon his crutch. Then he spat into the spring. There, he cried, that's what I think of ye. Before an hour's out, I'll stove in your old blockhouse like a ram puncheon. Laugh, by thunder, laugh. Before an hour's out, you'll laugh upon the other side. Them that'll die'll be the lucky ones. And with a dreadful oath he stumbled off, ploughed down the sand, was helped across the stockade after 4 or 5 failures by the man with the flag of truce, and disappeared an instant afterwards among the trees. So there we go. Wonderful, wonderful. And obviously I did think about trying to imitate Robert Newton. Them that die will be the lucky ones. Har, har, har. But I couldn't do it. With a straight face. Sorry. So I did my best. But that is a wonderful, wonderful scene, of course. It might not be the most literary, but I just love these Victorian boys' own adventure types. Just fantastic, fantastic. And of course, there is an interesting link between. If you know this or not, the poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley that I tried to recite earlier, and Long John Silver, because Henley was a very sickly person. He had tuberculosis, and it resulted in the amputation of his left leg below the knee. And one of his best friends, they were friends for over 15 years, was Robert Louis Stevenson, who used Henley as his model for Long John Silver. You might think that's not necessarily something a friend would do. However, I think he wanted to get across that despite Henley's disability, despite Silver's disability, they were strong men, who could do a lot of things. And so it is a tribute, I think, and he wrote it in a letter to Henley after Treasure Island was published back in 1883. He said, "I will now make a confession. It was the sight of your maimed strength and masterfulness that begot Long John Silver. The idea of a maimed man ruling and dreaded by the sound was entirely taken from you." So I think that is definitely a wonderful tribute there. Oh gosh, I'm going on, aren't I? My goodness, almost at 25 minutes. Let's carry on. Number 7, does any Victorian literature imitate you? If so, what and why? Not really. I prefer some things over others, but that's just more the type of work rather than I'm intimidated by it. So, for example, Thomas Hardy, with the exception maybe of The Mayor of Casterbridge, maybe. I don't know. I just find it all terribly. It's all pretty much terribly depressing and miserable, and I don't particularly like that. But I don't have much of an interest necessarily in reading things like Tess of the D'Aubervilles, Jude the Obscure, maybe, or that kind of thing. So it's not really intimidation. It's also but like North and South, maybe by Gaskell again. I'm not really drawn to it. Not intimidated, just don't have much interest. If someone said to me, "Oh, it really is amazing and you really should read it," then I'm open-minded enough to give it a go, but I'm not going to pick it up on my own without any gentle prodding. So there we go. Probably anyway. Number 8, what tips would you give to someone early on in their Victoria literature journey? Short stories. Start with short stories and build up from there, because I think and start maybe with the later Victorians, because they are much easier to read. Yeah, they're much closer to us. The style, because the Victorian era is quite long, right? So the style of writing does change, I think, quite considerably from the early Victorian era to the end of it, to a point where it is much easier to read the likes of Arthur Conan Doyle or H.G. Wells than even Dickens, really, especially if you're embarking on it. And with the likes of Dickens and Trollope and co, the books can be quite long, and I think that can be intimidating if you're not used to the style. Whereas if you start with a shorter work or a short story, I don't think the short stories get enough attention on BookTube. I've done my best with it. Certainly on my Patreon, I try and read short stories to people, because I think it's such a wonderful art, and it does need to be, I think, looked at a bit more. But that would be my advice to you, starting out, is maybe start with late Victorian and work your way back, and start with shorter works before embarking on a big one. Because if you find it intimidating, it's you feel more of that sense of failure when you give up, when it's really massive. Whereas you might be tempted to carry on if it's shorter, perhaps. But then, I don't know. You just have to explore it and try and choose something that's in a around a topic or a theme that actually naturally interests you. Something like, although not technically Victorian, because it was published, they were published in the early Edwardian era, but the author himself was definitely Victorian. But something like M.R. James's Ghost Stories, say, right? I think 1904 the first collection was published, so it's just 3 years after the Victorian era. Obviously not much has changed, but that kind of thing where it's a short ghost story, if you like horror or something like that, then it's a good place to start. So start with what interests you. If you're not interested in, big romances or something, don't. Read something like Diary of a Nobody by the Grossmith brothers. It's like 100 and something pages, and it's funny, and it gives you a nice little window into Victorian life. Maybe that kind of thing. I think it's Victorian. It's not Edwardian, is it? Oh, I'm getting too confused. But there's not much in it. Number 9. What is your top recommended read for other readers of Victorian literature? Well, again, I encourage. I was going to say 3 Minute Boat by Jayne and Jerry. I would actually encourage all lovers of Victorian literature to read My Life and Times by Jerome K. Jerome. It is published in like 1924 or 1925, something like that. But it is, he was born in the, I think 1860, somewhere around that. So a big chunk of his life is spent in the Victorian era. And he really does discuss not just his life, but the times he's living in. And it's a fantastic window for anyone interested in the Victorian era to actually see what someone's life was like then. He's not born to wealth and power and that kind of thing. He has a very ordinary, and in some instance quite he's not super poor like workhouse poor, but the family does have money troubles and they do struggle. But when he talks about remembering the first bicycles coming along and all that kind of stuff, it's fascinating. So I would suggest everybody to read that if you have an interest in the Victorian era, and also, again, to read short stories. Go out there and explore more Victorian short stories. Don't just stick with these novels, and try some different ones, because you always see the same ones pretty much coming around. I'm seeing more and more now. Mrs. Oliphant's or Mrs. Henry Wood's, or I've seen a little bit of Ouida maybe, but I think it'd be nice to see some people trying some of the more obscure ones. I mean, you might say they're obscure for a reason, but I don't know if that's necessarily fair, because they were, a lot of them were very popular in their day. Like extremely popular. Mrs. Oliphant, Margaret Oliphant, was extremely popular in her day. I think she's rumoured to have been the favourite author of Queen Victoria herself, right? And yet hardly anyone reads her now. Richard Marsh, his book The Beetle, published same year as Dracula, was a much bigger success at the time. And yet, again, who reads The Beetle now, right? Everybody reads Dracula. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, the last thing is to tag people. Well, if you watch this, you're tagged. It's a cop-out, but I think pretty much everyone I would have tagged has been tagged already. So there we go. But thanks, Ross, for creating it. And thank you very much for watching. And I would really love as well to thank all my wonderful patrons for their continued support. I really do appreciate it. I had problems putting on my Patreon flash up thing, but I will list everybody in the description of the video. So do take care, everybody. Bye bye.